December 10, 2022, World Cup quarter-final. Argentina versus Netherlands, one of the most heated matches of the entire tournament. Both teams were physical. The atmosphere was electric and there were arguments. In the 88th minute, both teams started fighting. Then,
he was the opponent. He was supposed to be the enemy on that pitch. And yet, in the middle of the most explosive World Cup quarter-final in a decade, it was Virgil van Dijk, the Netherlands captain, the man whose entire job was to shut Lionel Messi down, who put a protective hand on Messi's shoulder while his own teammates were still boiling with rage. Think about that for a second. If a rival captain mid-battle, in a match dripping with tension, chooses to shield Messi rather than confront him, what does that tell you about how his own teammates feel? This is the question that sits underneath one of football's most quietly debated mysteries. Why does Lionel Messi command a kind of devotion from his teammates that borders on worship, while Cristiano Ronaldo, arguably just as decorated, just as relentless, just as history-defining, receives something closer to professional respect than personal love? This is not about who is the better footballer. That debate has been argued into exhaustion for almost 2 decades. This is about something more human, more psychological, and honestly more revealing. It is about why some leaders inspire people to run through walls for them, and others simply inspire people to play well next to them. Let's start with culture, because culture shapes everything before a single ball is even kicked. In much of Europe, and Portugal is no exception, football has historically been built as a collective religion rather than an individual one. Coaches are trained to think in systems, in units, in shapes that move together like a single organism. The romantic idea of one magical player carrying an entire nation on his back has never quite fit the European footballing psyche the way it fits South America's. In Latin America, and especially in Argentina, the culture is almost the opposite. The individual genius is not just accepted, he is elevated to near-mythical status. Diego Maradona was not remembered simply as a brilliant footballer in Argentina. He became something closer to a folk saint, a man whose flaws were forgiven precisely because his brilliance felt otherworldly. Messi inherited that same cultural framework the moment he began wearing the sky blue and white. So, when a young Rodrigo de Paul or a young Julian Alvarez was growing up, they were not simply watching a talented senior professional on television. They were absorbing something closer to devotion. Alvarez, born in the small town of Calchin, a place with a population barely into the thousands, grew up watching Messi the way an entire generation of Argentine children did, not as a footballer to admire, but as a figure who felt sacred. By the time these players actually stepped into a dressing room alongside him, that early emotional imprint didn't disappear. It transformed into loyalty. Ronaldo's teammates in Portugal, by contrast, grew up admiring a phenomenal talent, but without that same cultural mechanism turning admiration into near-spiritual attachment. The emotional starting point was simply different, and that difference echoes through every relationship Ronaldo has ever had inside a national team dressing room. Then there is the matter of how each man actually plays the game, because style is not just tactics, it is character revealed through movement. Messi has always been, at his core, a creator. Yes, the goals have piled up over the years until the numbers stopped making rational sense. But what defines him as a teammate is his instinct to give before he takes. He sees passes that shouldn't exist. He finds pockets of space that defenders swear were covered. Nahuel Molina scored in the 2022 World Cup off a pass from Messi that most players would call a miracle of vision, the kind of assist a footballer remembers for the rest of his life and recounts to his grandchildren decades later. Julian Alvarez has spoken about the surreal feeling of receiving service from Messi in that same tournament, a feeling he has described as almost impossible to process in the moment. This is the currency Messi trades in. He makes the people around him better, and he does it deliberately, repeatedly, as a matter of habit rather than exception. Ronaldo's brilliance runs on a different engine entirely. He is, without question, one of the greatest finishers the sport has ever produced, a striker whose hunger for goals has fueled 2 decades of relentless output. But that hunger is built around a simpler equation. The team creates and Ronaldo finishes. Wingers stretch defenses to open lanes for him. Midfielders recycle possession patiently, so the ball eventually reaches his feet in dangerous zones. Fullbacks overlap, and whip-in crosses engineered for his aerial power. It is an entire structure designed to serve one man's finishing instincts. There is a meaningful difference between teammates who feel like partners in creation and teammates who feel like suppliers to a finisher. Messi's statistics with Barcelona tell part of this story in a very literal way. He voluntarily handed off more than 30 penalties across his career there to teammates who needed the confidence boost or the milestone more than he did, including roughly 11 to Neymar and 8 to Luis Suarez. With Argentina, when Lautaro Martinez was grinding through a difficult scoring drought, it was Messi who stepped aside and let him take a penalty instead. Compare that to a documented moment from February 2010, when Real Madrid were coasting to a 5-2 win over Villarreal, and Ronaldo, who had already scored that day, was approached by Xabi Alonso, asking for the penalty because Alonso hadn't yet opened his account for the club. Ronaldo reluctantly agreed, and cameras caught him walking back to his own half without joining the celebration when Alonso converted. Neither man is a villain in these moments. Ronaldo has given away penalties, 2 over the years, but the pattern, repeated across a career, tells you something about instinct. Messi's instinct leans toward the collective. Ronaldo's leans toward the personal, and teammates notice which instinct they are playing alongside every single day. Coaching relationships add another layer to this story, one that rarely gets enough credit. Since 2018, Argentina has had exactly one head coach, Lionel Scaloni, and under his management, the team has won the Copa America, the Finalissima, and the 2022 World Cup. 8 years under a single voice does something to a squad that constant change cannot replicate. Trust compounds, familiarity deepens, and Scaloni made no secret, in press conferences and public statements over the years, that Messi sits at the emotional and tactical center of everything Argentina builds. He has spoken about Messi not with the guarded language of a boss managing an asset, but with something closer to genuine fandom. When the man holding the clipboard treats a player with that level of reverence, it sends a signal down through the entire squad, whether consciously or not. Ronaldo's coaching history with Portugal has followed a very different rhythm. Fernando Santos led the national team for 8 years, from 2014 to 2022, followed by Roberto Martinez taking over afterward. Longevity alone was not the problem. The difference lies in how those coaches related to Ronaldo specifically. At the 2022 World Cup, Santos made the decision to drop Ronaldo from the starting lineup for the round of 16 match against Switzerland. Portugal responded by winning 6-1, with Goncalo Ramos scoring a hat-trick in his place. It was, whether intended as one or not, a public demonstration that the team could function, even thrive, without its most famous face in the starting 11. It is genuinely difficult to imagine Scaloni ever making that same call with Messi, not because Messi is untouchable, but because the entire footballing ecosystem around him has been built with him as the emotional and tactical anchor. Ronaldo never had a coach construct that same architecture of devotion around him at international level, and the absence of that architecture matters more than people usually admit. Shared suffering is perhaps the most human explanation of all, and it is easy to underestimate how powerfully collective heartbreak can bond a group of people together. Argentina's road to the 2022 title was paved with scar tissue. The 2014 World Cup final ended in a 1-0 extra time loss to Germany. The 2015 Copa America final ended in defeat to Chile on penalties. The 2016 Copa America final ended the exact same way, against the exact same opponent, on penalties again. 3 major finals lost in a row, and 3 times the cameras captured Messi in visible anguish afterward. Now imagine being a teenager like Julian Alvarez, watching all of that unfold on television as a devoted fan, absorbing every one of those losses personally, and then years later walking into a training session and finding that same man, the one you watched suffer publicly, standing there as your actual teammate. That is not an ordinary professional relationship. That is something closer to a debt of the heart. Emiliano Martinez made this explicit before the 2022 World Cup when he chose not to celebrate Messi's birthday, saying publicly that he wanted the trophy itself to be the gift instead. That kind of statement doesn't come from admiration alone.